Christmas 1979. Soviet armor pours across the Afghan border towards Kabul as helicopters secure the mountain passes through the Hindu Kush mountains. In Moscow, the Politburo has decided to save Afghanistan's communist government from collapse. Afghan rebels have taken up arms against the unpopular regime and control most of the countryside. But the Red Army leadership doubts it can pacify the country. So why did the Soviet Union invade Afghanistan? Afghanistan in the 1970s is a country with a long history as a crossroads of empire and internal instability. After World War II, there's a period of relative stability under King Zahir Shah, whose government introduces moderate reforms to avoid angering conservatives. He also suppresses those demanding too much change, including Afghan communists who already have contact with the Soviet KGB. In 1964, King Zahir introduces a more liberal constitution that allows political parties. At the same time, Kabul universities become a hotbed of political activity. From moderates to monarchists, campus communists create the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. Among their founding members are Hafizullah Amin, Babrak Karmal, and Noor Mohammad Taraki, all of whom work with the KGB. They have strong admiration for the Soviet transformation of its Central Asian republics. They want radical change, but project a more moderate line in public, and still only attracts support from a few urban elites and Soviet-trained army officers. The few communists there were also split along ethnic and ideological lines in 1967, with a more hardline group under Taraki and a more moderate group under Karmal. While some Afghans look to socialism, others look to political Islam, not necessarily radical Islam either. Educated Islamist Afghans debate what a modern Islamic society should be like. The king even encourages Islamist activities to contain Marxist influence. The most important Islamist group is also founded at a university, Jamiat Islam, which preaches a conservative form of Islam inspired by Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. Afghanistan's relations with the wider world are also in flux after 1945. In 1960, Soviet-equipped Afghan forces clash with neighboring Pakistan over the status of cross-border territory inhabited by Afghanistan's biggest ethnic group, the Pashtuns. Pakistan wants a stable and neutral Afghanistan so it can focus on its conflict with India. Kabul also looks abroad for humanitarian aid from both sides of the Cold War. Officially, Afghanistan leans heavily on Soviet aid, including for infrastructure, but engineers and other advisors from the US, West Germany and elsewhere also work in the country. American scholar Louis Dupree writes of a privileged American-Soviet role in Afghanistan. In towns outside Kabul, where Russians had major projects, their technicians lived as well. As if not better than the Americans. They had spacious hotel and apartment accommodations, lavish commissaries, private theaters, Olympic-sized swimming pools. Many Soviet technicians genuinely felt disturbed when ordered home after a tour of duty. Like their American counterparts, they had never had it so good. Dupree. 527. The modernization program and international aid help create a small urban middle class in Asian cities. The countryside accepts new infrastructure but resists social changes that make some headway in cities, like women's education and rights. By the 1960s, Afghanistan's modernization is falling behind other developing states, and King Zahir is still reluctant to further democratize the country, partly due to his fear of communism. In 1973, Mohammad Daoud Khan takes power in an army-backed coup. At first he works with the moderate communist, but soon excludes them and rules as a strongman, silencing any opposition and purging the civil service and officer corps. Afghan Islamists oppose Daoud's progressive policies and harsh rule, and Pakistan's intelligence service EIC provides them training and equipment for armed resistance. After an ISIA-supported Islamist attack against Afghan government buildings in 1975, Daoud imprisons, executes, or forces them into exile. Many Islamists flee to Pakistan, where President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's his government allows them to settle in the hopes of creating a thorn in Kabul's side. Former engineering student Muhammad Ishaq remembers the escape to Pakistan. We took part in an operation in the Panjshir Valley in 1975, and we were defeated. Then we had to retreat into the mountains, and it was very dark. Uprisings lead to Mujahideen control in much of the north and east. The PDPA responds with more violence, carried out by the secret police, the KGB-supported intel agency, and Sarandoi. All the while, the internal split between Taraki and his ambitious protege Amin deep. The PDPA's grip further weakens in 1979. In February, unknown militants kidnap U.S. Ambassador Adolf Dubs and hold him in central Kabul. Then, Afghan government forces, with KGB involvement, botch an attempted rescue. Dubs is killed, and the U.S. stops aid programs. In March, a week-long uprising begins in Herat. An entire army division mutinies after being ordered to quell protests. Kabul sends in more troops. The protesters then kill those suspected of connections to the PDPA and lynch Soviet civilian advisors and their families. The government puts down the uprising at a cost of between 3,000 and 25,000 dead. Another revolt in Kunar province ends with 640 deaths in Karela village, witnessed by 16-year-old Mohammed Ashok. My father told me to get up and run, and I ran to the mosque. Behind me I heard the sound of gunfire. From the mosque, I saw soldiers take more men to another field and shoot them. Leak. 200. A worried Taraki asks Moscow to intervene to shore up the Afghan government. Almost nobody does support the government. In Kabul we have no workers, only craftsmen. If Herat falls, then the revolution is doomed. Uprisings have emerged throughout the entire country, and the army is too small to be able to pacify the insurgents everywhere. Tomzin, the Politburo, though, is shocked. At Kabul's brutal reaction to the Herat uprising, we gave them everything, and what had come off? Nothing of any value. After all, it was they who executed innocent people for no reason, and told us that we also executed people in Lenin's time. You see what kind of Marxists we found? Dmitrukis 45 Moscow begins to consider military intervention to keep Afghanistan within its sphere of influence. But not all agree. Head of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, is among the skeptics. He worries that Afghanistan is too underdeveloped to solve its problems with socialism, and only through force could the USSR prevent a revolution there. A risk he advises against. After the Herat uprising, Amin becomes prime minister. And although he and Taraki are still at odds, both request more Soviet aid. Moscow somewhat reluctantly agrees to send equipment, including T-62 tanks and Mi-2 for helicopters, and more military advisors. But they refuse to send troops. Even so, the Mujahideen have already noticed the limited Soviet presence. Original audio. The Russians have taken part in the Afghan war now, and they have been in Panjshir and Paksia, and also in Konar areas. Some of the Russian advisors have been killed. The Soviets want Amin out, as they hold him responsible for the massacres and policy failures, and are suspicious because he previously studied in the U.S. They informed Taraki in September 1979, after which he tries to capture and probably kill Amin. But Amin escapes and has Taraki murdered with a pillow and takes over. The insurgency gains momentum quickly. 40% of the Afghan army deserts, leaving it with just 60,000 men, and about 40,000 Afghan men joined the Mujahideen. The insurgents control for provinces in the countryside and a dozen others. Amin reaches out to the US and UK and says he wants to deepen ties, though both countries are suspicious of his motives. This move, though inflames Soviet worries, the KGB even suspects incorrectly that he might be a CIA agent. The Politburo sends more officers to train Afghan troops, an additional airborne battalion to Bagram airfield, and some troops to Kabul, officially for protection. By early December, Andropov leans toward intervention. A military operation would allow us to decide the question of defending the gains of the April Revolution, establishing Leninist principles in the party and state leadership of Afghanistan, and securing our positions in this country. Leak 76, on December 12, 1979. The Politburo secretly decides on regime change. Amin will be toppled and replaced with moderate Afghan communist Babra Karmel to help the new Afghan government. They will also carry out a limited military deployment against Islamists and possible Iranian or Pakistani intervention. At the decisive meeting, Soviet Chief of the General Staff, Nikolai Ogakov, warns against it. We will alienate the entire Muslim East and suffer political damage globally. Andropov, though, interrupts him. Focus on military matters. G. Are you Colonel Vasily? Kolesnik is in charge of the plan. Soviet Military Intelligence's Muslim Battalion flew into Kabul on December 10th, supposedly to protect Amin. There are also 2 KGB teams, Zenit and Grum, and a company of air assault troops. All in all, about 560 men. Amin and Taraki had suggested the creation of the Muslim Battalion to allow Soviet troops to keep a lower profile. It consists of soldiers from Soviet Central Asian republics to appear more familiar to locals and wearing Afghan uniforms, to blend in with Afghan troops. The initial plan has to be redrawn after Amin moves to the Tajbog Palace on December 16th. Although since the Soviets are providing part of his security, they get detailed plans of the arrangements at the palace. Still, the Tajbog is a tough nut to crack. It's on a hill. The surrounding area is mined, and there are Afghan army barracks and 3 Dugan T-54 tanks nearby. More Afghan troops with tanks and anti-aircraft guns are in the vicinity as well, bringing the total to 2,500 men defending the palace. The Soviet attack force is split into 12 groups. BG-1 will neutralize the emplaced tanks. BG-2 is the main assault force. With 6 BMPs, they will storm the palace via the main road and take out guard posts along the way. BG-3 will outflank the palace from the west. The other groups will pin down Afghan troops, take out Afghan anti-aircraft guns, and provide fire support, including with 4 ZSU-2, 3, 4 Shilka, self-propelled, radar-guided, anti-aircraft weapons, and grenade launchers. Command, recovery, and medical teams are also nearby. Operation Storm 333 begins on December 27, and Amin still believes the Soviets are on his side. The Soviet divisions are already on the way here. Paratroopers have landed in Kabul. All is going well. I am constantly on the telephone communicating with Comrade Group, and we are discussing the best way to inform the world about this Soviet military assistance. Grau, just after Amin gives this speech, the KGB tries to kill him with poisoned cola, but he survives. Meanwhile, Soviet teams launch sabotage operations across the city to confuse Afghan forces, including Soviet advisors removing batteries from tanks, or KGB agents crippling the telephone network. Still more Soviet units quickly take important government and infrastructure buildings like a prison, the post office, DRA General Staff Building, the TV and radio center, secret police headquarters, and defense and interior ministries. Colonel Yevgeny Chernyshev records his impressions in his diary. The movement of the paratroopers' convoy through the city could be tracked by the sound of gunfire. As our units approached the targets, gunfire erupted, and tracer rounds streaked across the sky. The Afghan guards were ready to defend themselves. Yevgeny Chernyshev's diary for 1979 at the palace. Kolesnik's force runs into trouble. Although Amin believes at first the Soviets are on his side, Afghan forces are on guard after the failed cola poisoning. BG-1 engages, but the shooting causes DRA forces to raise a general alert at 7:15 p.m. So, Kolesnik orders a general assault with fire support. DRA troops knock out several Soviet BMPs of BG-2, so the Red Army troops continue on foot and reach the palace at 7:40. They storm the lower floor and heavy fighting ensues. Meanwhile, BG-3 takes losses approaching the other side of the palace, but eventually reaches the palace under cover of the shield. Other groups successfully pin down Afghan units outside the palace, and 2 groups help the stalled BG-1 to eliminate the Dugan tanks. Colonel V.G. Salkin remembers the attack. First, KGB special units stormed the palace. Then some Spetsnaz troops followed. In an attempt to scare the defenders, or perhaps out of fear, the attackers shouted loudly, mostly profanities. The fighting inside the palace immediately became fierce and uncompromising. If no one came from a room with their hands raised, the doors were broken down, grenades were thrown in. Then the attackers opened fire with automatic weapons indiscriminately. BG-2 and 3 make it upstairs in the palace, but they're down to 50 men. They kill most of Amin's bodyguards, and find and kill Amin and his 2 sons. The whole operations lasts 43 minutes. At least 9 Soviet troops are killed, though some claim up to 100, and 69 badly wounded. while around 200 Afghans are killed and hundreds taken prisoner. Military brass decorates nearly all Storm 333 participants, including Kala, who is made a hero of the Soviet Union. Storm 333 also leaves a legacy as a daring and successful special operation. Years later, some in Russia will look at it as a bright spot in the Afghan war, and it becomes a staple of the Russian Airborne Officer Academy, including the hybrid combination with sabotage, disinformation, and subversion. The day after the raid, on December 28th, Karmal arrives in Kabul and promises the public he'll stop the torture and execute and unite the PDPA. Not included in the pre-recorded broadcast message is the ongoing execution of Amin's closest followers. Many Afghans don't believe Karmal is a public reassurances, and 430,000 flee to Pakistan by January 1980. Within 72 hours, the USSR has installed a new Afghan leader, even though the invasion and regime change plans were hatched mere weeks before. More than 40 years later, historians still debate why exactly the Soviets decided to invade. Operation Baikal 79 was a gamble. Given the Afghanistan's unstable history and the fact that the USSR was not militarily, economically, or politically prepared to nation build, the Soviets lacked a local expertise and language skills, and it's still unclear exactly how much influence they really had on the PDPA after the invasion. Soviet leaders knew it would damage their projected image as allies of anti-colonial movements as well. At a March meeting, Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko made the danger clear. Who will the Soviet army fight against? Against the Afghan people first and foremost. And they'll have to be fired on everything that we created in recent years in terms of detente, arms control, and many other things. All of that will be thrown back. Of course, it'll be a good present for China. All the non-aligned countries will be against us. Radchenko, 482, 481, and yet, the Soviets had reasons to be confident. They had successfully intervened in Czechoslovakia in 1968, Ethiopia from 1974, and Angola from 1975. In Angola, local communists even functioned as vanguard party that led the revolution themselves. Moscow hoped the PDPA would play a similar role in Afghanistan. Even before the SOR revolution, Moscow sent thousands of civilian advisors, including Communist Youth League members, to work with young Afghans. Some historians point to the potential influence of Soviet officials like Ambassador to Afghanistan Alexander Puzanov and KGB Lieutenant General Boris Ivanov, who was long stationed in the country. Both strongly argued for intervention, and Puzanov was a close friend of Taraki. They and others close to him may have influenced Andropov, who was initially skeptical of an invasion, but available sources are incomplete. What is clear is that Amin's seizure of power tipped the balance. Moscow concluded he was not loyal to the Soviet Union and planned to shift away from the U.S. In the end, the Cold War fear of losing Afghanistan to even indirect U.S. influence outweighed the risks. Back in December 1979, just as Gromyko fears, Moscow's roll of the dice in Afghanistan provokes a flurry of international reactions that spell trouble. The US and UK worry about Soviet control in Afghanistan, and President Jimmy Carter announces global Soviet expansionism must be stopped. Original audio: Jimmy Carter, the Soviet Union, is going to have to answer some basic questions. Will it help promote a more stable international environment in which its own legitimate, peaceful concerns can be pursued? Or will it continue to expand its military power far beyond its genuine security needs and use that power for colonial conquest? The Soviet Union must realize that its decision to use military force in Afghanistan will be costly to every political and economic relationship it values. Some in the Carter administration hope the conflict might turn into a Soviet Vietnam. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, though, worries the Mujahideen are too weak and disorganized and lack foreign support. Unlike North Vietnam, he also thinks the Soviets will act more decisively than the US did in Vietnam. The US still decides to increase financial and military support for the Mujahideen and encourages the Chinese and other Muslim countries to help them as well. But the biggest change is US policy towards Pakistan. We must both reassure Pakistan and encourage it to help the rebels. This will require a review of our policy toward Pakistan. More guarantees to it, more arms aid, and, alas, a decision that our security policy toward Pakistan cannot be dictated by our non-proliferation policy. Kal 51 Zbigniew Brzezinski. From now on, the U.S. will be much closer to Pakistan and look the other way on nuclear weapons and questions of democracy. Pakistan-based CIA agent Howard Hart argues that the existing support for the Mujahideen should be expanded to include weapons. The Pakistanis also strengthen cooperation with Saudi Arabia. Head of Saudi Intel Turki Al-Faisal sees Pakistan as the best option to keep the Soviets out of the Middle East, and soon provides the ISI with funds matching U.S. contributions. The UN General Assembly condemns the Soviet invasion. Many voting member states with a colonial past are uncomfortable with a great power invading a country that claimed to be non-aligned and anti-imperial. Secretary General Kurt Waldheim, ironically a former Nazi from Austria, tries to negotiate a settlement. But the USSR, the new Afghan government, and neighbors Pakistan and revolutionary Iran are not interested. There will be no quick and easy peace in Afghanistan. Soviet troops have marched into what will become a longer, costlier, and bloodier war than any have imagined. We hope you enjoyed this breakdown of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. We are going to cover the entire history of the Soviet-Afghan War and the aftermath until the U.S. invasion in 2001 in a multi-part series. Such ambitious multi-part projects are only possible because of your ongoing support on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com Real-to-Me History, you can contribute a monthly or annual amount and make real-time history documentaries better for everyone. Your support means we can spend more time and money on research, footage, map animations, and produce more detailed documentaries. We want to thank Sofia Shirogorove for her support with this documentary. If you want to learn more about the Vietnam War, check out our almost 3-hour-long documentary. As usual, you can find all the sources for this video in the description below. I am Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of histcoop, the only history channel that won't drink KGB cola.